Imagine living your entire life as if someone is watching. Not literally watching, but judging, keeping score, taking notes. God, history, posterity, some cosmic audience that will eventually render a verdict on whether you lived well or badly, whether your life mattered or was wasted. Most people live this way without even realizing it. They make choices with an invisible judge in mind. They justify their actions as if explaining them to some higher authority. They worry about their legacy, their reputation, their place in some grand narrative. They live, in other words, with appeal. They're appealing to something beyond themselves for validation, for meaning, for judgment. But Albert Camus says, stop appealing. There is no judge. There is no cosmic audience. There is no one keeping score. And once you truly accept this, once you learn to live without appeal, everything changes. You become present. You become free. You become, finally, yourself. The phrase living without appeal comes from the myth of Sisyphus. Camus writes that the absurd man lives without appeal. What does this mean? It means living without calling out to anything external for justification, without asking God to validate your choices, without asking history to vindicate your struggles, without asking the universe to confirm that your life has meaning. You simply live. You make choices. You act. You exist. And you don't need anyone or anything to tell you that you're doing it right, because there is no right. There's only your life, your choices, your present moment, and that's all there is. That's all there needs to be. This is incredibly difficult for most people. We're trained from birth to seek approval from parents, from teachers, from society, from God. We're told that our worth depends on external validation, that we need to prove ourselves, that we need to justify our existence, that we need to matter to something bigger than ourselves. And this training runs deep. Even people who don't believe in God often act as if they're being judged by something, the arc of history, human progress, future generations, the universe itself. They want their lives to count. They want to be remembered. They want their suffering to have been for something. They want desperately to appeal to something that will say, yes, your life mattered. Yes, you did well. Yes, it was worth it. Camus says, let it go. All of it. There is no cosmic judge. There is no historical vindication. There is no future generation that will remember you with gratitude. There is no meaning beyond the meaning you create in the moment. And accepting this, fully accepting this, is not nihilism. It's not despair. It's liberation. Because as long as you're living with appeal, as long as you're constantly checking whether you're living up to some external standard, you're not really living. You're performing, you're waiting for a verdict that will never come. But when you stop appealing, when you accept that there's no audience, you can finally just live, just exist without the constant pressure of justification. Let's look at what living with appeal looks like. Take someone who believes in God and an afterlife. Their life is structured around the final judgment. Every choice is made with heaven or hell in mind. They do good not because they want to, but because they're building a case for their salvation. They avoid evil not because it harms others, but because they're afraid of divine punishment. Their entire existence is an appeal to God. Please accept me. Please approve of me. Please let me into paradise. Now, Camus isn't mocking this. He understands the comfort it provides. But he's saying it comes at a cost. You're never present. You're always thinking about the future judgment. You're never acting freely. You're always calculating what the judge wants. You're not living your life. You're living for an imagined audience. Or take someone who doesn't believe in God but believes in historical progress. A revolutionary, an activist, someone who says, I'm fighting for a better future. My suffering now will be redeemed by the utopia to come. Future generations will look back and thank me. They're appealing to history. They're asking the future to validate their present struggles. And again, Camus respects the dedication. But he sees the problem. You're sacrificing the present for an imagined future. You're deferring meaning, you saying, My life doesn't have to be good now because it will be justified later. But later never comes. The future doesn't vindicate. History doesn't judge fairly. And you've spent your one life waiting for validation from people who do. You exist, yet, and never will in the form you imagine. Even people who claim to be atheists and materialists often live with appeal. They appeal to reason, to science, to progress, to their legacy. They want to leave something behind. They want to be remembered. They want their work to matter to posterity. But Camus asks, why? Why do you need posterity to remember you? Why isn't living right now enough? Why isn't the immediate experience of existence sufficient? What are you appealing to? And often the answer is some vague sense that life must mean something beyond itself, that there must be some larger context in which your actions register. But there isn't. There's just you right now making choices and then eventually not being here anymore. And that's it. That's the whole story. And it's enough. Living without appeal means embracing the present moment completely. Not because the present is perfect. Not because you're pretending the future doesn't exist, but because the present is all you actually have. The past is gone. It cannot be changed. The future hasn't arrived. It may never arrive in the form you imagine. The only moment you can actually live is now. And if you're spending now appealing to some imagined then, you're not really living. You're waiting to live. You're rehearsing for the performance that will never happen. But if you stop appealing, if you accept that this moment has no audience, no judge, no cosmic significance, then you can fully inhabit it. You can be here completely, without reservation, without the constant background anxiety of, am I doing this right? Am I living correctly? Will this matter? Think about Sisyphus. Again, he's pushing his boulder. It rolls. Then he walks back. He pushes again, eternally. If Sisyphus were living with appeal, this would be unbearable. He would constantly be asking, why am I doing this? What's the point? Is anyone watching? Does this matter? He would be appealing to the gods who condemned him, begging them to end his punishment, to validate his suffering, to give it meaning. But Camus imagines Sisyphus differently. Sisyphus has stopped appealing. He's not asking the gods for anything. He's not hoping for redemption. He's not waiting for the punishment to end. He's just pushing the boulder fully, consciously in the present moment. The boulder is his life. The pushing is what he does. And he doesn't need it to mean anything beyond that. He doesn't need anyone to tell him it's worthwhile. It's what he's doing. That's enough. And in that acceptance, in that complete presence without appeal, you find something like happiness. Or think about Mirza at the end of The Stranger. He's in prison, sentenced to death. A chaplain visits, trying to get him to accept God, to repent, to appeal to divine mercy, and Mirza explodes. He grabs the chaplain. He shouts. He says he's certain of his life and his death and everything. He doesn't need God's certainty because he has his own. He doesn't need salvation because he's already lived. Every moment of his life, meaningless as it may have been to others, was his, was real, was lived, and no imagined afterlife, no divine judgment can take that from him or add to it. He's living without appeal. He's not asking God to validate his existence. He's not hoping for heaven. He's not afraid of hell. He's just accepting what is. And in that acceptance, in that refusal to appeal to anything beyond his own experience, he achieves a kind of freedom that the chaplain, with all his faith, can never know. If you've made it this far, if the idea of living without any external validation is both terrifying and exhilarating, subscribe to keep exploring this radical way of being. Hit the like button if you're ready to stop waiting for approval from the universe, because each video takes us deeper into what it means to live authentically in the absence of cosmic meaning. Now, let's talk about what this means for you right now in your actual life. How much of what you do is done with an invisible audience in mind? How often do you make choices while imagining how they'll look to others, to God, to your parents, to society, to some future version of yourself, to history? How often do you justify your actions as if you're explaining them to a judge? And what would change if you stopped? What would you do differently if you fully accepted that no one is watching, no one is judging, no one is keeping score? This doesn't mean acting without ethics. This doesn't mean doing whatever you want without considering consequences. Living without appeal is not living without responsibility. In fact, it increases responsibility because you can't defer your choices to external authorities. You can't say, I did this because God wanted it. I did this because history demanded it. I did this because it's what society expected. You have to own your choices completely. They're yours. They come from you. They express your values, not values handed to you by some external judge. And owning your choices without appeal is harder than following orders. It requires more thought, more courage, more honesty. But it also brings clarity. When you stop appealing, you stop living in bad faith. You stop pretending that your actions are justified by something beyond yourself. You recognize that you're the source of your own values. And this recognition forces you to be deliberate, to choose consciously, to ask yourself, do I really value this? Or am I just performing what I think I should value? Do I really want this? Or am I just doing what I imagine some authority wants me to want? Living without appeal strips away the layers of social conditioning, of inherited beliefs, of unconscious conformity. It forces you to confront your actual desires, your actual values, your actual self, and that confrontation is uncomfortable. But it's necessary, because as long as you're living for an audience, you're not living as yourself. Camus writes about the absurd man accumulating experiences, multiplying what he cannot unify. This is connected to living without appeal. If you're living with appeal, you need your life to form a coherent narrative. You need to be able to explain to the judge how it all fits together, how each choice contributed to some larger purpose. But if you're living without appeal, you don't need coherence. You don't need to justify why you tried this and then tried that, why you loved this person and then loved another, why you pursued this goal and then abandoned it. You're not building a case. You're not constructing a defense. You're just living, experiencing, trying things. And some things work and some do U&T, and none of it needs to add up to some grand meaning. It's just your life, your accumulation of moments, your collection of experiences, and that's valid. That's enough. You don't owe anyone an explanation. This also changes how you relate to failure and success. If you're living with appeal, failure is devastating because you've let down the judge. You failed to live up to the standard. You've wasted your chance. Success is validating because you've proven your worth to the authority. But if you're living without appeal, failure and success lose their moral weight. They're just outcomes. You tried something, it worked or it didn't. You learned or you didn't. You enjoyed it or you didn't. But neither outcome proves anything about your cosmic worth, because there is no cosmic worth. There's just your experience, your learning, your continuing. And that continuing doesn't require success. It doesn't require approval. It just requires that you keep living, keep choosing, keep existing in the present without constantly checking whether you're measuring up to some imagined standard. Living without appeal also transforms death. If you're living with appeal, death is the moment of judgment. Everything leads to that final verdict. Did I live well? Did I accomplish enough? Will I be remembered? Will I be saved? Death is terrifying because it's when the judge renders the final decision. But if you're living without appeal, death is just the end of your existence. No judgment, no verdict, no afterlife where you're rewarded or punished. You live, you die, you cease to exist. And knowing this doesn't make life less valuable. It makes it more valuable because this is it. This is all there is. So you'd better live it fully. You'd better be present. You'd better not waste it appealing to imaginary authorities when you could be experiencing the actual reality of being alive right now. So stop appealing. Stop checking whether you're good enough. Stop asking if your life matters. Stop waiting for validation from the universe or God or history or posterity. Just live, make choices, experience existence, create your own values, and don't explain them to anyone. Don't justify them. Don't perform them for an audience. Just be them. Just live them fully, consciously, presently, without appeal, because there's no one to appeal to. There never was. And accepting that, truly accepting that, is not the end of meaning. It's the beginning of freedom. The freedom to live your life as your life. Not as a performance, not as an audition, not as a case being built for some final judgment, just as existence, just as being, just as a temporary, finite, precious present moment that is all you have and all you need. That's living without appeal. That's authentic existence. That's what the absurd man does, and it's what you can do to, if you're brave enough to let go, if you're honest enough to face the absence, if you're strong enough to stand in the present without reaching for something beyond it, that's the challenge. That's the freedom. That's the life. Welcome to living without appeal. Welcome to the present moment. Welcome to Camus Speaks.